Hello everyone and welcome to the session on digital tools for long-term adult care. Before we go on to speakers, I would like to share the housekeeping with you. I'm sure you've seen it many times, but we'll share it anyway. Use the question tab for the Q&A sessions, and there will be a Q&A session in this event. Use the chat tab for any comments or feedback. Don't put your questions on that tab. And remember to be respectful and kind when you're posting anything. All the sessions are being recorded so that we can watch them later. And please remember to give the speakers feedback, and you'll also get points for this. At the end of the session, we'll show the secret code for everybody that is participating in the Challenge Hub. Okay, so I'd like to tell you that one of the speakers, Sheila Aquino, is unfortunately unable to be with us today. And so I will now introduce Jodie Mills, who will speak to us about co-designing solutions to create a smart speaker tool for speech and voice difficulties for people living with Parkinson's disease. Thanks, Jodie.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everybody. So today I'm going to present about the therapeutic applications of smart speakers in speech and language therapy. And as Pauline said, I will be discussing smart speakers for people with Parkinson's disease, and people who are experiencing speech and voice difficulties, and the co-designed tool. So my name is Jodie. I am a speech therapist, but also a PhD researcher at Ulster University in Belfast in Northern Ireland. And I'm supervised by Dr. Katie Pedlow, Professor George Kernahan, and Dr. Orla Duffy. So what is the problem that we are trying to solve? Miller 2011 indicates that around 90% of people with Parkinson's will have speech and voice changes. However, research also indicates that only 52% of people with Parkinson's will access speech and language therapy in the UK, which leaves about 48% without access to therapy. A bit of a shocking statistic. And as such, there are several barriers for people with Parkinson's trying to access speech and language therapy. As we all know, there are long post-COVID waiting lists. The resource-intensive nature of LSVT Lounge is also a barrier, and the protocol states there that it should be delivered 4 times weekly for 4 weeks, which in a lot of NHS trusts is just not possible. There's a shortage of speech and language therapists in the UK, and similarly high vacancy rates too. And then to finish off, there is an ever-increasing population of people living with Parkinson's disease. So because we're going to talk about smart speakers, what actually is a smart speaker? So in this research, a smart speaker is defined as a device which uses automatic speech recognition, which is actually a type of AI, to recognise what you say, interpret what you say, and carry out an action in response to that. So this is like whenever you ask Alexa, for example, is it going to rain today? And then you get a response. It uses automatic speech recognition. And as I've just said there, smart speakers may be better known by their commercial brand names such as Amazon Alexa, Google Home, or Google Nest. So what do we actually know? Where are we starting from? Research shows that smart speakers will poorly recognise dysarthric speech. And as we all know, when our smart speaker doesn't understand us, most of the time we will probably shout at it. And as such, the feedback from smart speakers often prompts people with speech difficulties to adapt their speech as well. So in research, people with Parkinson's report speaking slowly, clearly, and loudly, specifically when interacting with their smart speakers. And we know that this will share some similarities with the think loud focus of LSVT loud. There may also be some applications in terms of self-awareness, as people are being prompted by the smart speaker. Also, a survey of speech and language therapists in the UK reported that 20% had used the devices therapeutically in clinical practice. So overall, I would say that as a team, we agreed the evidence required development. So our team took the first steps in developing this by conducting a scoping review, looking at the therapeutic potential of smart speakers for speech and voice difficulties, finding that they had potential as a tool in speech and language therapy for improving volume and intelligibility. And more information on that scoping review can be found on a poster, one of two posters, which you can find in the poster sessions. So have a look at it. So we continued to develop this evidence by conducting focus groups with people with Parkinson's with speech and voice difficulties, carers, and speech and language therapists who were all using smart speakers, and speech therapists who were using them therapeutically in their clinical practice. So 5 themes were evident. Smart speakers had the potential to drive positive speech therapy outcomes, and indeed, changes in speech were reported by the participants who were using smart speakers themselves. They did also discuss concerns about privacy and confidentiality, as many of us will probably share ourselves, usability challenges, support needs in relation to knowledge and education, and potentially developing an Alexa skill for speech therapy in the future. And again, more information on these focus groups, specifically related to the speech therapy side of them, is also available in a poster in the poster gallery. So apart from this, there were several barriers to the effective use of smart speakers amongst people with Parkinson's and speech therapists found in these focus groups. So people with Parkinson's reported feeling frustrated, again, as most of us will do, by having to repeat themselves to be understood, by devices timing out before they had even finished speaking, and by being unable to actually have a conversation with their smart speaker. It was very transactional. Speech therapists also indicated that they faced technical and practical challenges with implementing smart speakers as tools. Both people with Parkinson's and speech therapists reported a lack of knowledge about smart speaker capabilities in terms of therapeutic capabilities, and concerns surrounding privacy and data security. So addressing those aforementioned challenges is really essential to enable the integration of smart speakers into clinical practice for speech therapists. And design thinking is a user-centered innovation framework generally used to guide the development of new healthcare technologies, often using co-design approaches. It'll use a structured approach to identify problems and generate solutions through empathy, through collaboration, iterative prototyping and testing. And this present study that I'm now going to talk about is informed by specifically the ideation phase of the design thinking process. As it is part of my kind of overall PhD, that framework will govern all of the stages. So the aim of this piece of research was to co-produce solutions to support the use of smart speakers in speech and language therapy for improving volume and intelligibility for people with Parkinson's. There were 3 objectives, as you can see: to co-produce problem statements from the perspectives of experts by experience, to co-create solutions to problem statements associated with using smart speakers, and to prioritise co-designed solutions to inform future smart speaker interventions. So this is just a very quick overview of the methodology co-design, and this will be fully discussed in the next few slides. So to touch on our co-design methodology, what actually is co-design? It's a hot topic. I'm going to define it as a participatory research approach that involves power sharing and equality, where lived experience of participants is regarded as expertise. So it really involves listening, valuing, and truly hearing everybody that's involved, and can also help to empower our participants through that collaboration. And overall, it will result in new ideas and solutions which prioritise the needs of end users. So in this case, it will be people with Parkinson's, firstly. And co-design can also result in improved outcomes for technologies, as they can be used in a way which actually meets clients' needs. And this is important and has important implications for rehabilitation that speech therapists might carry out. So initially we held a PPI workshop following the focus groups, and this PPI group was established over the whole of the PhD. And this was conducted to select the top 6 barriers which were previously found in those focus groups that I just discussed. So in line with design thinking, these were reframed into how might we statements. And this is basically to promote solution-based thinking rather than thinking about them as barriers. So I'm going to read these 6 how might we statements out just so we get an idea of what we were working with. So how might we help people to understand smart speaker privacy and reduce fears? How might we help people to have a conversation with a smart speaker? How could smart speaker technology be adapted? How might we help people when smart speakers don't work? How might we help people to know what smart speakers can do? And how could we deliver this information? So next we held 2 co-design workshops with people with Parkinson's, carers, speech and language therapists, tech and design experts, and third sector representatives. And there were 20 people overall. So the first workshop brainstormed solution to these 6 how might we statements I've just discussed. And the second workshop then ranked the solutions that people came up with. And this is showing where the participants' priorities lie, and it's given them really true control over what happens next. So finally, once we got those prioritised solutions, we analysed them using content analysis and synthesised them into 2 prototypes. So next I'm going to talk about our findings. So as part of the co-design process, we gained feedback from these 20 collaborators. And upon reflection, it probably would have been good practice to include some sort of quantitative information here, but what we have is mainly qualitative. So they reported feeling included and respected. So for example, the carer and the patient were heard. Here they were put front and centre. I felt valued. I felt everyone has been equally valued no matter how you're coming at it. They also said that the right people were involved in the workshops. So for example, it was helpful to consider all views, speech therapists, patients and tech experts, and that was a person with Parkinson's. And you get a really holistic picture of what is the most important thing from different perspectives. And again, that really shows what collaboration is all about with co-design. So as I said, these co-design workshops resulted in the creation of 2 prototypes. So education and guidance on the therapeutic use of smart speakers. And secondly, developing new speech and language therapy specific features for smart speakers. So I'm going to give you a quick summary of what those would include. So in terms of education and guidance, this would look like a therapeutic usage guide tailored to using smart speakers to help with speech and voice. Extra clinical information for speech therapists relating to goal setting, therapy integration, and even skills and uses which can be repurposed for speech and language therapy, but are things that actually already exist. A troubleshooting guide for speech therapists and people with Parkinson's, which specifically relates to concerns that they had talked about in the focus groups. Discussion on privacy settings, fact about data privacy, including myth busting what does and doesn't happen, and also how smart speakers can satisfy government's requirements. So then secondly, developing these new specific features for smart speakers. Generally, this would include an Alexa skill specifically for speech therapy. And you will see on the poster for my focus groups, it says, Alexa, you do the speech therapy. That's kind of where the idea has come from. So this Alexa skill would include enhanced privacy features, both for clinicians and for people with Parkinson's, integrated AI for conversational interaction. And although this is beginning to be implemented in things like Amazon Alexa with Alexa Plus, that has not yet become available in Northern Ireland. So this is perhaps why it had been suggested. And finally, people had suggested that they would like this Alexa skill to be reviewed by the Parkinson's UK Trusted Tech Group. So this is a group in Parkinson's UK where technology is reviewed by people with Parkinson's themselves as well as clinicians. And it was felt that this would enhance the trust in relation to smart speakers and their use therapeutically. So we also wanted to reflect on the impact of co-design, although as we said, this was not quantitatively captured, it is still an important impact to take away. So people with Parkinson's reported feeling empowered. Many people with Parkinson's physically and both metaphorically lose their voices along with their Parkinson's diagnosis. And I think an opportunity to have their voice heard and encouraged was meaningful both for their confidence and their sense of self. And I think that's something that's really integral to co-design. Power sharing and partnership can enhance engagement, I think, as is probably evident from our work, as well as patient-centered outcomes. And as I touched on again earlier, that's important for things like rehabilitation and person-centered and patient-centered care. Additionally, involving speech therapists was likely to help improve future implementation and adoption of smart speakers as a tool within clinical practice because it's something that some are using, but it's created in a way which meets their needs rather than perhaps being surplus. And indeed, wider research does kind of agree with what we found, showing that confidence, motivation, and improved well-being for people with communication difficulties who have taken part in co-design. So overall, co-production can allow collaborators to feel in control, empowered, and validated. So I just want to quickly reflect on some limitations. So our study offered valuable insights. However, there are some things for perhaps consideration in the future. Participants suggested an additional workshop between workshop A and workshop B. So a third workshop, a bridging session could have allowed more reflection and improved understanding, potentially helping people to rank those solutions a little bit more easily with improved knowledge. And although our recruitment was successful with 20 people involved, there was still a little bit of participant dropout between the two workshops. And in the second workshop, some of the groups had to be merged, which may have influenced those kind of safety group dynamics and limited the continuity of discussion. And despite efforts to recruit a diverse group, the sample was small, relatively small, with 20 people. And certain perspectives, such as people with more advanced stage Parkinson's or severe dysarthria, were probably underrepresented, which may limit the generalizability of the findings. And finally, given that this whole world of technology is evolving with AI and automatic speech recognition, some of the recommendations may actually be outdated by the time that they would be implemented in practice. And as I said, this includes things like smart speaker capabilities, privacy policies, and the integration of large language models. So in terms of future research, I think there are probably a few things to consider. The first one being a feasibility trial to establish if smart speaker use can actually improve volume, clarity, and intelligibility for people with Parkinson's. And that is underway as the final study within my PhD currently. But also to explore smart speakers' impact on motivation, perhaps motivation to practice and to continue with exercises, which we know is difficult in Parkinson's. And also how smart speakers may change therapy dosage in comparison to traditional speech and language therapy interventions. So these are my reference slides, just to put those up at the end. And that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I would like to welcome any and all questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jodie, for that really fascinating and innovative and person-centred presentation. I'm not seeing any questions coming through, but I do actually have a couple myself. We're doing LSVT in our area, and we've got an interest in this. I'm really interested in how you got support from the technology and design experts and how you created that team.
Yes, I think that's a good question. So generally, I think people who work in technology and design they're innovative to start with. So they like to be involved in projects which are slightly different, but to kind of build those relationships, it was a little bit challenging. but I just kind of had to kind of go through contact in industry and really emphasize that the user-centered design was the important part of the project. And once they understood that it was user-centered design, they were all very keen to kind of come on board with that.
Thank you. I've got some questions come through on the technology now. Louise Thompson is asking, would this work with Apple devices like Siri or HomePod?
Yes, so my understanding and from the research we've done is that some people and speech therapists have used Siri and they have used Apple devices. So with everything, the software, like the automatic speech recognition, will be slightly different probably for each different device. So it's difficult to know what the level of recognition will be, but it definitely does work. I had one speech therapist in the focus groups who was using Siri as an intelligibility tool. Um, so I would definitely say that can be used. It's not just limited to smart speakers, but kind of anything with that automatic speech recognition and feedback feature.
Thank you. Another question from Sarah Casti. Are you hoping to produce an education and guidance document that can be shared with people with Parkinson's disease who are considering using a smart speaker?
Hopefully in the future, that may be beyond the scope of my PhD at the moment, but it would certainly be an area for future research. As I've said, I think at the moment it's important to establish those sort of quantitative outcomes. And then once we have that established and we know that it actually will improve, or if it doesn't, that's okay, establish that before we can really implement the education and guidance. But we have got the information we need. And yes, that will be probably shared with people with Parkinson's, but also for speech therapists as well, that will be tailored to kind of the individual needs of the group.
Thank you. I have another question from Bryndis Gudmundsdottir. Have you looked at a creation tool within AIs like Chat, GTP, or Copilot?
So let me just make sure I understand this question. So is the question how well that ChatGPT or Copilot recognizes speech, or is it have I used it to create something new? Just so that I can make sure I'm answering that correctly, because I'm not sure.
If Bryndis is able to put anything else on to clarify that, we come back to that question.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question from Yasmin Taha. Has your research showed individuals having a preference to a specific smart speaker?
That's a very good question. So I don't actually think that's reported in the findings, but from my knowledge, generally it tends to be Alexa. Research shows kind of on ownership statistics that Amazon Alexa is very much the market leader. And that was reflected in what I found. Generally, I think there was perhaps only one or two using Google, but there were no people that were using both devices that could have compared and then suggested a preference. But yes, Amazon would be the market leader, I would say.
Okay, I'll keep going with the questions because we've got plenty of time. Okay, so earlier, this is Amnat Khan who's answering this. Earlier you mentioned service restrictions with LSVT loud and how using smart speakers requires the principles LSVT teaches. So would smart speakers be used as part of therapy as a biofeedback tool or to compensate for service restrictions?
That is a big question. And I'm not 100% sure if the research is at the stage to firmly suggest anything. So anything that I say would probably be very preliminary, if that makes sense. From my perspective, I do think, given that smart speakers, like you said, work on those similar principles to LSVT, it could be used potentially, I would say, as an additional tool to speech therapy. So I did get some speech therapists suggest that it could be potentially used before coming to speech therapy. If there were strategies sent out, for example, use your smart speaker, think loud, think clearly, all those sorts of things, they could be used while people are on a waiting list to see if those sort of things help them. However, I think there are certain risks with that whenever people are not in contact with direct speech therapy care, and that has to be taken into account. Additionally, I definitely do think that perhaps post LSVT, it would be a very good way to help people with their maintenance. So, in research, a lot of the time, LSVT is reported by people with Parkinson's to be it lacks a little bit of real world validity for them, and often they don't kind of keep up with that practice. And then, as people will know, they tail off a little bit. So, by having something which is, I'm going to say functional, you use it every day, um, it kind of gets round that barrier a little bit. So I would say once we do this final study, we will probably be able to help with some suggestions for how it could be used alongside therapy or in maintenance. But at the moment, I would not say that it is a replacement for therapy, and I don't think that it should be either. I think it's a tool to be used in conjunction perhaps with LSVT, definitely not as a replacement.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to Brindis has clarified her question on the AIs like Chat, GTP or Copilot, and she has said, what I am wondering on if your design could be used with other AIs as smart speakers don't understand Icelandic. I'm thinking ahead, that makes it a bit clearer. Is that she's Icelandic?
Okay. That's a good question. I'm going to be honest, I haven't quite considered that. I suppose it is slightly limited in the fact that all the studies have been done in the UK. I would say there probably is capabilities with automatic speech recognition. It generally is being continuously improved. Um, but I would encourage you if you want to explore perhaps using it with ChatGPT or with Copilot, and let me know how you get on because I would be keen to know. But at this time, I'm not 100% sure is the answer to your question, but we will try to find out.
Thanks, Jodie. There's a few more questions if you're okay.
Yes, that's grand.
This is from Claire Ramsey. The EMJ put out an article recently about smart speakers supporting the early identification of Parkinson's disease. Is this part of the study?
No. So the way I like to think about my study is, or my studies in PhD is, it's very much focused on the sort of the therapy side or that sort of management. It's not so much to do with assessment or with diagnosis. In the scope interview which we conducted, we did look a little bit at perhaps where it could be used in assessment, and generally the evidence for speech therapy related smart speaker use was suggesting that it was not at the stage yet where it could be used in speech and language therapy assessment. However, I do recognise, as you said, that for looking at biomarkers in speech and things in related to Parkinson's diagnosis, it can be helpful, but no, that is not within the remit of my study, so that would be separate.
Okay. I have a question from Rachel Barton, who's asking, what are the GDPR considerations of using smart speakers in therapy?
Yes, I think it's a big and a good question, and one that whenever we come to designing and finalising these kind of education guidelines that we will really need to know. I think it probably varies depending on specifically what region you're in. I think it really needs to meet in terms of trusts. They will have their own governance requirements. For example, even when you're putting new technology on your computers, it has to go through governance. So I suppose it's figuring out and understanding where it lies with governance. And the problem with that is it's not easy to find out. I have made lots and lots of inquiries to Amazon themselves, and the information that they give is, I would say, perhaps not clear enough or full enough to really go forward into governance at the moment. There are some ways you probably get around it, but I think finding out specifically what they do with data and what they do with privacy, although that information is somewhat available online, it's really getting down to that to figure out whether it satisfies each individual trust's governance. But from my understanding, you you are able to delete. So, for example, in terms of data storage, you're able to delete all the information off the Alexa. You can do that. You can set up your own privacy settings so that it only keeps the recordings for so long. There are mute buttons, so you can, I'm going to say, stop it listening, as some people in my research have said. But I think that's at a stage where we're very much still trying to figure that out for each place, especially because it's so varied. Um, but what if I do figure that out and we do as a team, I'll let you know.
Okay. Got 3 more questions for you, if that's okay with you,
Yes.
Jodie. This is from Esther Olusa. What strategies exist for supporting users whose speech is too unclear for the device to recognise commands reliably?
Okay, so that's a good question. I think it very much sort of emphasizes what sort of service user at the moment we would be looking at to use it with. So in my studies, it has generally been people who have mild to sort of moderate voice or and speech impairments. So and as a team, I would say we would not recommend using it with somebody who had severe dysarthria or voice impairments, just due to the sort of psychosocial and frustration impacts, especially as people have reported that. So at the moment, the answer to that would be generally mild to moderate. And I do understand that that leaves out the kind of more severe speech population. However, I am going to caveat that with ASR, automatic speech recognition, is being continually improved. And as part of that, they're improving it for dysarthric speech. So in the future, it may vastly change. In the future, it perhaps could be used for severe dysarthric speech, if we wanted to call it that. I think the one limitation is, though, it's all to do with like an unfamiliar listener. So if that person with severe dysarthria went into a shop, they probably wouldn't be recognised. And I think there are perhaps some dangers of having a device which recognises them really well, and they don't really have to adapt their speech because that doesn't reflect what happens in the real world. So there's kind of 2 parts and 2 answers to that, but that's what I would say in relation to sort of more severe difficulties at the moment.
Thank you. A question from Ren Miller. Would it be that the smart speaker would conduct an SLT session, or would it be used for practicing clear speech strategies between sessions?
I would definitely say the second part of that. So the practicing, I think, would probably be the main element. It is not going to conduct a session. It's not going to get anybody out of their job. That's not what we're doing at all. It's an adjunct, as someone described in my research, an adjunct to therapy. So perhaps in the example of a person with young onset Parkinson's, if they're very busy during the day, don't have a lot of time to practice, that practice in between therapy can be done when they're at home with their speaker in the evenings. You know, it's always there, that sort of thing. Um, I also think there is, as part of the practice, for self-awareness. So we know that self-awareness of volume is very much sort of reduced in Parkinson's. And again, I think that could be a good way for people to practice that, without having their caregiver continuously say, "Oh, speak up. What was that?" Because that is quite difficult emotionally. Um, the objective feedback and things we've been hearing about objective feedback again contributes to practice, but no, it will not be conducting a session, not capable of that just yet anyway.
Okay, and this is your last question, Jodie, from Claire Devereux. Did the potential cognitive or processing issues people with Parkinson's disease can have an impact on accessibility or design of, for example, the instructions? I don't know if it,
Okay.
yeah. Do you want me to read it again, or are you okay with that?
I think I understand the question. So Is this to do with instructions to Alexa? I'm assuming, okay, I'm going to answer it like that, and if it's
Okay.
not right, you can let me know. So, in response to that, I would say yes, but we don't have an awful lot of information. So, the people that we had in our research were people who didn't have dementia or any other sort of cognitive difficulties, but they did report that that sort of phrasing of thought could be slightly difficult when they were interacting with their smart speaker, as it is when you're having conversation. And a kind of way to get around that was just having it written down for them. Um, but yes, I would say that it probably impacts, but as to what extent yet, we're not 100% sure. But that can be something for future research. Once we've kind of established feasibility, it's then all those sort of nuances that will begin to build the bigger picture. So thank you for bringing that to my attention anyway.
Okay, that's the end of the Q&A. You'll be relieved to hear we're a bit longer because, as I said, the other speaker was unable to make it today. So let me just thank you very much for your really interesting, cutting-edge presentation, and also being such a good sport and answering all the questions so fully. Just think of it as practice for defending your PhD thesis, Jodie, and good luck in that, by the way. So I think there is a code that's going to come up or has come up. So remember to give the feedback to the speakers, and I think the session code is 4981 for all those doing the Challenge Hub. And we can finish a bit early and you can all have a few more minutes at the poster sessions. Thanks once again. Bye-bye.